Sarah Mitchell knew what they were saying about her. She could hear the whispers in the mess hall, see the smirks when she walked past the training grounds, feel the doubt radiating from every corner of Forward Operating Base Jackson in eastern Afghanistan. At 5'4" and 120 pounds, she didn't look like the other soldiers in her unit. She didn't have the broad shoulders of Sergeant Davis or the intimidating presence of Corporal Martinez. What she had was heart. What she had was determination. But in the eyes of most of the men in Alpha Company, that wasn't enough. "There she is," Private Collins muttered as Sarah entered the equipment room one scorching afternoon. "Our delicate little flower," the other men laughed. Sarah kept her face neutral, her jaw set. She'd learned not to react. Reacting only made it worse. "I still can't believe they let her deploy with us," another voice chimed in. It was Sergeant Thompson, a broad-shouldered man from Texas who'd made his opinions about women in combat very clear from day one. "This isn't some office job. People die out here." Sarah grabbed her gear and turned to face them. "I passed the same test you did, Sergeant." Thompson stepped closer, his eyes cold. "Passing a test on a base in California is different from real combat, sweetheart. When bullets start flying, your pretty little test scores won't mean a thing. I can handle myself." "Can you?" Thompson crossed his arms. "Because when I'm out there, I need to know the person next to me can carry me to safety if I go down. I need to know they won't freeze. I need to know they're strong enough to do the job." The words stung because Sarah had asked herself the same questions in the dark hours of the night. She'd trained harder than anyone. She'd pushed herself beyond every limit. But the doubt still crept in sometimes, whispered to her in moments of weakness. "I won't let you down," she said quietly. Thompson shook his head. "You already have, just by being here." Sarah left the equipment room with her head high, but her hands were shaking. She'd been dealing with this for 6 months now, ever since she'd arrived at the FOB. 6 months of being called weak, soft, a liability. 6 months of being excluded from missions, given the least important tasks, treated like she was invisible. Her commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, was one of the few who didn't openly mock her, but he didn't defend her either. He simply assigned her to support roles, administrative tasks, anything that kept her away from actual combat operations. "It's for your own safety," he told her once, his tone suggesting the conversation was over before it began. But Sarah hadn't joined the army to file paperwork. She'd joined to serve, to prove that women belonged in every role, to show her younger sister back home that strength came in all forms. Instead, she was stuck on a forward operating base, watching other soldiers go out on missions while she inventoried supplies and processed reports. That evening, as the sun set over the Afghan mountains, Sarah went to the gym. It was a crude setup, just some weights and equipment in a reinforced tent, but it was her sanctuary. Here she could work out her frustration, push her body, remind herself why she'd fought so hard to be here. She was halfway through her 3rd set of deadlifts when Lieutenant Marcus Chen entered. Unlike most of the others, Chen had always been respectful to Sarah. He was quiet, competent, and led his squad with calm efficiency. "You're getting stronger," he observed, watching her complete the set. Sarah set down the bar and wiped sweat from her forehead. Not strong enough, apparently. Chen grabbed a weight and sat on the bench nearby. "Thompson's an idiot." "You know that, right?" "Thompson speaks for most of the men here. Not all of us." Chen met her eyes. "I've seen you train. I've seen your scores. You're better than half the guys in this unit. Then why am I still stuck on base duty?" Chen sighed. "Because Reynolds is afraid. He's afraid that if something happens to you, his career is over. He's afraid of the scrutiny, the questions, the headlines. It's easier to keep you safe and sidelined than to treat you like every other soldier." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "That's not fair." "No, it's not." Chen stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, if I had a choice, I'd want you on my squad. You've got something most of these guys don't." "What's that?" "Something to prove." After he left, Sarah continued her workout with renewed intensity. She thought about her sister Emma, 16 years old, and watching her every move. She thought about all the girls who were told they couldn't, shouldn't, weren't strong enough. She thought about every obstacle she'd overcome just to get here. The mockery hurt. The exclusion hurt worse. But giving up? That wasn't an option. Late that night, lying in her bunk, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would prove them wrong. All of them. She didn't know how or when, but someday they would see what she was truly capable of. She had no idea that opportunity would come sooner than she thought, and that it would cost her everything. The next morning began like any other. Sarah woke before dawn, completed her run around the base perimeter, and reported for duty. Captain Reynolds assigned her to inventory medical supplies, a task that should have taken a few hours but that Sarah stretched out to fill the day. What else did she have to do? Around mid-morning, she noticed increased activity around the operations center. Soldiers moved with purpose, their expressions tense. Something was happening. Sarah tried to get information from the medics she was working with, but they knew as little as she did. Finally, around noon, Lieutenant Chen appeared in the medical tent. "We've got a situation," he said, his voice tight. "A patrol encountered an IED 3 miles northwest of here. 2 vehicles damaged, possible casualties. They're requesting immediate medevac." Sarah's heart jumped. "How bad?" "Unknown. Communications are spotty." Chen glanced at her. "We're sending out a rescue team. I just wanted to let you know in case we need medical supplies prepped." "I can go with you," Sarah said immediately. Chen's expression was pained. "Sarah, you know Reynolds won't approve that. I'm trained for this." "I can help. I know you can." "But—" He stopped as his radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was frantic, broken by static. "Under fire, repeat, under fire, need immediate." The transmission cut out. Chen's jaw tightened. "I have to go. Get those supplies ready." He disappeared, and Sarah felt the familiar frustration burning in her chest. Out there, soldiers were in danger. Out there, she could make a difference. But she was stuck here, counting bandages and checking expiration dates. She watched through the tent opening as Lieutenant Chen's rescue team assembled. 12 soldiers, armed and equipped, loading into 3 armored vehicles. Sergeant Thompson was among them, looking grim and focused. Whatever was happening out there, it was serious. The vehicles roared out of the base, leaving dust and diesel fumes in their wake. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but her mind was with that rescue team. She thought about the injured soldiers, wondered who they were, hoped they would make it back safely. The minutes crawled by like hours. 90 minutes later, the radio in the medical tent erupted with urgent chatter. "We need emergency medical standing by. Multiple casualties. Repeat, multiple casualties incoming." The medical staff exploded into action. Sarah helped prep the treatment area, laying out supplies, preparing IV bags, doing everything she could to be useful. Her hands moved automatically, her training taking over. The first vehicle came back 20 minutes later, moving fast. Then the second. But there was no third vehicle. Sarah's stomach dropped. The casualties were bad. 3 soldiers with serious injuries from the IED blast. The medical team swarmed them immediately, and Sarah assisted where she could, her earlier inventory forgotten. She held pressure on a wound, helped stabilize a leg, talked soothingly to a young soldier who was crying for his mother. In the chaos, she overheard pieces of conversation from the rescue team. Ambush. They were waiting. Third vehicle took heavy fire, had to fall back. Sarah grabbed Lieutenant Chen as he passed by. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, his eyes haunted. "What happened?" she demanded. "It was a trap," he said hoarsely. "The IED was just the beginning. When we arrived, insurgents opened fire from multiple positions. We got the first casualties out, but—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "But what?" "The third vehicle got separated during the firefight. 3 men inside. We lost radio contact." He looked at her with hollow eyes. "They're still out there." "Who?" "Davis, Williams, and Thompson." Sarah felt ice flood her veins. Whatever she thought of Thompson, he was still one of their own. They all were. "We're organizing another rescue operation," Chen continued. "But it's going to take time to get air support, coordinate with command." "How much time?" "Hours, maybe. We have to do this right." Sarah understood military protocol. She understood the need for proper planning. But she also understood that hours could mean the difference between life and death. Over the next 3 hours, she watched the base transform into controlled chaos. Officers shouted into radios. Soldiers prepped equipment. Helicopters were requested but delayed due to other operations. Everyone was trying to help, but bureaucracy and procedure moved slowly. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. As afternoon bled into evening, she stood outside the operations center trying to get information. That's when she overheard Captain Reynolds talking to another officer. "Can't risk more casualties, have to wait for proper air support. Those men could be dying." "Sir, I'm aware of that." Reynolds sounded strained. "But I won't send more soldiers into an ambush. We wait for the helicopters and we do this properly. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She understood his reasoning. She even agreed with it in principle, but every instinct in her body was screaming that waiting was wrong. She thought about Sergeant Thompson, the man who'd called her weak, who'd said she didn't belong. She thought about Davis and Williams, who'd never been openly cruel, but had never stood up for her either. They'd all doubted her, but they were still her brothers in arms. As darkness fell over the base, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Sarah moved quietly through the base as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Most of the soldiers were focused on the operations center or the medical tent, which meant less attention on the motor pool. She knew what she was about to do was insane. It violated every protocol, every rule, every bit of military discipline she'd been taught. She could be court-martialed. She could be dishonorably discharged. She could die. But 3 men were out there, and every minute of delay meant their chances of survival dropped. Sarah had spent 6 months on this base being sidelined, overlooked, and underestimated. She'd spent 6 months proving herself in every way except the one that mattered. Maybe this was reckless. Maybe this was foolish. But she was done waiting for permission to be the soldier she'd trained to be. She grabbed essential supplies from the medical tent when no one was looking. Bandages, tourniquets, morphine, IV bags. She stuffed them into a pack along with water and ammunition for her M4 rifle. Her hands were steady as she worked, her mind clear. The motor pool had minimal security at night, most personnel being focused on the rescue operation planning. Sarah approached one of the smaller armored vehicles, a Humvee that was fueled and ready. She'd learned to drive these during training, though she'd rarely been allowed to since arriving at the FOB. She was checking the vehicle when a voice behind her made her freeze. "What are you doing?" Sarah spun around. Lieutenant Chen stood in the shadows, his expression unreadable. "I'm going after them," Sarah said simply. There was no point in lying. That's suicide. "You don't even know exactly where they are." "I know the approximate coordinates. I heard the communications earlier." She had been paying attention, memorizing every detail she could gather. "I have a general location and I have tracking skills. Even if you find them, you'll be one soldier against unknown enemy forces. Then come with me." Chen stared at her for a long moment. "I can't. I have orders. I have responsibilities." "So do I. My responsibility is to those 3 men. Sarah, this is crazy. You'll be throwing away your career. Probably your life." She met his eyes steadily. Thompson was right about one thing. When bullets fly, test scores don't matter. What matters is whether you're willing to do whatever it takes to save your brothers and sisters in arms. I'm done proving myself on paper. I'm done waiting for permission. Chen's jaw worked silently. Then, to her surprise, he pulled out a handheld GPS unit and punched in coordinates. "Last known position," he said quietly, handing it to her. "The terrain is rough. There's a dried riverbed that runs northeast from there. If they're mobile, they might have used it for cover." Sarah took the GPS, her heart pounding. "Thank you." "I'm not helping you," Chen said firmly. "If anyone asks, you stole that vehicle and I tried to stop you. Understand?" "Understood. And Sarah," he paused. "Bring them home." She climbed into the Humvee, her hands now shaking with adrenaline. The engine roared to life, sounding impossibly loud in the quiet evening. Within seconds, she knew alarms would be raised. She had maybe a 2-minute head start before the whole base knew what she'd done. Sarah gunned the engine and drove toward the front gate. The guard on duty, a young private named Jensen, stepped forward with confusion on his face. "Specialist Mitchell? Do you have authorization?" "Emergency medical run," Sarah called out, not slowing down. "Lieutenant Chen's orders." It was a lie, and a poor one, but Jensen hesitated just long enough. Sarah drove through the gate and into the Afghan night. Behind her, she heard shouting. Ahead, darkness and danger waited. The terrain was brutal. The Humvee bounced over rocks and ruts, the headlights cutting harsh beams through the blackness. Sarah kept her speed as fast as she dared, one eye on the GPS, the other on the landscape. She knew they'd send someone after her. Probably Chen would be ordered to bring her back. But by the time they organized and deployed, she'd have enough of a lead. She hoped. The coordinates Chen had given her were 8 miles northwest of the base. Sarah covered the distance in 20 agonizing minutes, every sense on high alert. The area where the ambush had occurred came into view, marked by the burned-out shell of a military vehicle. Sarah stopped about 100 yards away and killed the engine. She sat in silence for a moment, listening. The night was quiet except for the wind. She grabbed her rifle and the medical pack, then stepped out of the vehicle. The temperature had dropped, the desert cold seeping through her uniform. She moved toward the wreckage cautiously, weapon ready. The destroyed vehicle was empty, which was either a good sign or a terrible one. Sarah examined the ground, using a small flashlight with a red filter to preserve her night vision. She found blood, spent shell casings, and tracks leading away from the vehicle. The tracks headed northeast, toward the dried riverbed Chen had mentioned. Sarah followed them, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd done search and rescue training, learned tracking from an old army ranger who'd seen 3 wars. She'd been good at it, one of the few areas where her smaller size was actually an advantage. She could move quietly, notice small details, fit into spaces others couldn't. The tracks led her down an embankment and into a rocky channel that had once been a river. The walls on either side rose 10 feet high, providing cover from observation. Smart. If the men were thinking clearly, they'd use this terrain to evade pursuit. Sarah moved deeper into the riverbed, every sense straining. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the rocks, a groan, quiet, pained. She followed the sound around a bend and found them. All 3 men were there, huddled against the riverbed wall. Davis was unconscious, his leg twisted at a horrible angle. Williams was pressing a blood-soaked cloth against his side, his face gray with shock. And Thompson was propped against a rock, one arm hanging useless, his rifle across his lap. Thompson's eyes widened when he saw Sarah. "What the hell?" "Save it," Sarah said, dropping to her knees beside Davis. "We need to move fast." "Mitchell, how did you— You're not supposed to be—" I said save it. She was already checking Davis's pulse, assessing his injuries. Compound fracture of the femur, possible concussion, dehydrated but alive. She moved to Williams. Shrapnel wound to the abdomen, bleeding but not arterial, treatable if they moved quickly. Thompson tried to stand and fell back with a gasp of pain. Dislocated or broken shoulder, Sarah noted. "Can you walk?" she asked him. "I can manage." His voice was strained. "But Davis and Williams, I'll get them out. All of you." Thompson laughed, a bitter sound. You weigh 100 pounds soaking wet." "You can't—" Sarah cut him off with a look that could have melted steel. "I didn't come all this way to listen to you tell me what I can't do, Sergeant. I came to save your life." Sarah worked with focused intensity, the way she'd been trained. First, she stabilized Davis's leg using splinting materials from her pack and 2 pieces of wood she found nearby. He groaned but didn't wake up, which was probably for the best. Next, she changed Williams' dressing and started an IV to replace fluids. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Thompson watched her in silence, his expression unreadable. "Can you walk if I support you?" Sarah asked him once the other 2 were stable. "Maybe, but that doesn't solve the problem. We can't carry Davis and Williams can barely stand." Sarah looked at the 3 injured men, doing rapid calculations. The Humvee was a quarter-mile away. The terrain was rough. She had limited time before enemy fighters potentially returned to the area, and she had significantly less upper body strength than the average soldier. What she did have was technique, determination, and 6 months of being told she wasn't strong enough. "I need you to trust me," she said to Thompson. "Trust you to what?" "To get you home." She helped Thompson to his feet first. He was easily twice her weight, and his broken shoulder meant he couldn't support himself properly. Sarah ducked under his good arm and took most of his weight on her shoulders. Years of training had taught her how to use her legs and core, how to distribute weight properly, how to leverage physics when raw strength wasn't enough. They made it to the Humvee slowly, Thompson hissing with pain at every step. Sarah got him settled in the back seat, then gave him water and painkillers. "Stay here. I'll be back." "Mitchell." But she was already gone, running back toward the riverbed. Williams was conscious and could help himself somewhat. Sarah got him upright and half-carried, half-dragged him to the vehicle. He was sweating and pale, but he made it. 2 down. Davis was the real problem. Sarah knelt beside the unconscious sergeant, assessing the situation. He was 6 feet tall and probably 200 pounds of muscle. His injured leg meant she couldn't ask him to help support his own weight. And time was running out. She thought about her sister Emma, watching her videos, looking up to her. She thought about every person who'd said women didn't belong in combat. She thought about Thompson's words, "When I'm out there, I need to know the person next to me can carry me to safety if I go down. Sarah positioned herself beside Davis and worked him up onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry. The weight was immense, crushing, nearly impossible. Her legs shook with the strain. Every muscle in her body screamed, but she stood up one step, then another. Her breathing came in harsh gasps. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold. The quarter-mile back to the Humvee seemed like 100 miles. Sarah had trained for this. She'd practiced carries with weighted dummies. She'd done endless squats, deadlifts, and core work. But this was different. This was real weight, real stakes, real pain. Halfway to the vehicle, her legs nearly gave out. She stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. She couldn't fail, not now. Not after everything. She thought about every insult, every dismissal, every time she'd been told she wasn't good enough. The anger fueled her. The determination drove her forward. When she finally reached the Humvee, she carefully maneuvered Davis into the vehicle beside Williams. Her entire body was trembling, her shoulders on fire, her legs barely functional. Thompson stared at her with something like awe. You just carried a 200-pound man a quarter mile. Sarah didn't waste breath responding. She climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The drive back to the base was tense. Every bump sent Williams gasping in pain. Davis remained unconscious. Thompson kept watch out the windows, his good hand on his rifle, watching for threats. How did you even know where to find us? He asked finally. I listened. I paid attention. I didn't need permission to be prepared. A long silence followed. I was wrong about you, Thompson said quietly. I was wrong about a lot of things. Sarah didn't respond. She was focused on driving, on getting these men home alive, on completing the mission she'd set for herself. The base appeared in the distance, lights blazing. She could see vehicles assembled, could imagine the chaos her disappearance had caused. She was about to face serious consequences. Court-martial at minimum, possibly prison time for disobeying orders and stealing military property. But 3 men were alive because of what she'd done. As she drove through the gate, the base erupted into activity. Medical personnel swarmed the Humvee before it even fully stopped. Officers shouted orders. Someone was yelling her name. Sarah stepped out of the vehicle and found herself face to face with Captain Reynolds. His expression was thunderous. Specialist Mitchell, you are under. Sir, with respect, medical personnel need space to work. Sarah's voice was calm, steady. Whatever consequences I'm facing can wait until these men are stabilized. Reynolds looked like he wanted to argue, but Lieutenant Chen appeared at his shoulder. She's right, sir. Let's get the casualties to medical first. The next hour was a blur. Sarah watched as Davis, Williams, and Thompson were carried into the medical tent. She answered questions from officers, her responses clear and factual. Yes, she had taken the vehicle without authorization. Yes, she had left the base against orders. Yes, she understood the severity of her actions. She expected to be placed under arrest immediately. Instead, Captain Reynolds called her into his office 2 hours later. Sarah stood at attention, prepared for the worst. Reynolds sat behind his desk, his expression impossible to read. What you did tonight was reckless, dangerous, and a clear violation of military protocol. Yes, sir. You could have been killed. You could have compromised base security. You could have created an international incident. Yes, sir. But you didn't. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. You saved 3 lives. You demonstrated courage, initiative, and remarkable physical capability. Sarah remained silent, unsure where this was going. Sergeant Thompson has given his statement. Reynolds continued. He described how you carried Sergeant Davis, a man nearly twice your size, across difficult terrain. He described your medical care, your tactical awareness, your determination. He pulled out a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. It was a handwritten note. Sarah read Thompson's words. Specialist Mitchell is the strongest soldier I've served with. Not because of her physical strength, though she has more than I ever gave her credit for, but because she had the strength to do what was right when everyone else, including me, was too afraid or too bound by rules to act. She belongs in combat. She belongs leading soldiers. She saved my life, and I will spend the rest of my career making sure people know what she's capable of. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes, but forced them back. Reynolds stood. You're going to face a disciplinary hearing. That's unavoidable. But I'm going to recommend leniency. More than that, I'm going to recommend you for a Bronze Star with Valor. Sir, You were right and I was wrong, Reynolds said. I kept you off combat operations because I was afraid. Afraid of scrutiny. Afraid of responsibility. Afraid of what it would mean if something happened to you. But by protecting you, I was failing you. I was failing all the soldiers who could have benefited from serving alongside someone with your capabilities. He extended his hand. You're a credit to this unit, Specialist Mitchell. To this army. I'm honored to serve with you. Sarah shook his hand, finding it hard to speak past the lump in her throat. Over the following weeks, the story spread. The female soldier who'd been called too weak for combat had carried 3 men to safety. News outlets picked it up. Military blogs shared it. Sarah's sister Emma called her, crying with pride. But the real change happened at Fob Jackson. The mockery stopped. The whispers ended. When Sarah walked through the base now, soldiers nodded with respect. Some stopped to thank her. Others simply looked at her with new understanding. Sergeant Thompson became her most vocal supporter. He told anyone who would listen about that night about Sarah's courage and strength. The man who'd once said she was a liability now insisted she was essential. Davis recovered from his injuries and requested to serve under Sarah's leadership if she was ever promoted. Williams returned to duty and started advocating for more women in combat roles. Lieutenant Chen smiled at her one day in the gym, where she was back to her regular training routine. You know what you did, right? He said. Saved 3 lives? Changed minds. Proved what's possible. He gestured around the base. Every woman serving will have an easier path because of you. Every man who doubted will think twice before underestimating someone again. Sarah thought about that. She hadn't set out to make a statement or prove a point. She'd simply done what needed to be done. But maybe that was the most powerful statement of all. The Bronze Star ceremony was held 2 months later. Sarah stood at attention as Captain Reynolds pinned the medal to her uniform and read the citation detailing her actions. Her parents had flown in from home. Emma stood in the front row, tears streaming down her face. But the moment that meant the most came afterward, when Sergeant Thompson approached her. His shoulder had healed, though he still couldn't raise his arm completely. I owe you my life, he said. But more than that, I owe you an apology. For every doubt, every insult, every time I made you feel like you didn't belong. You belong here more than most of us. Thank you, Sergeant. Tom, he corrected. Call me Tom. And if you ever need anything, if you ever face anyone who questions whether you're strong enough, you send them to me. Because I've seen real strength, and it looked like a 5'4" woman who refused to leave anyone behind. That night, Sarah sat outside under the Afghan stars and wrote a letter to her sister. She told Emma about the ceremony, about the medal, about the 3 men who were alive because she'd refused to accept other people's limitations. But mostly, she wrote about what she'd learned. Strength wasn't about size or muscle mass. It was about courage in the face of fear. It was about doing what was right even when it cost you everything. It was about refusing to let other people's doubts become your reality. They called me too weak for combat, Sarah wrote. They said I didn't belong, that I was a liability, that I would fail when it mattered most. Maybe they believed it. For a while I almost believed it too. But then came the moment when belief didn't matter anymore, when all that mattered was action. And in that moment I learned something important. Strength isn't given. It's not assigned by rank or validated by others' opinions. Strength is what you discover when you push past every limitation, when you refuse to quit, when you carry the weight that everyone said would crush you. They were wrong about me, and if anyone ever tells you you're too small, too weak, too anything to achieve your dreams, remember this. They were wrong about me, and they're wrong about you too. The only question that matters is whether you believe in yourself enough to prove it. Sarah sealed the letter and looked up at the stars, the same stars that shone over her home thousands of miles away. She thought about the long road that had brought her here, about all the obstacles she'd overcome, about the 3 lives she'd saved and the countless others she might save in the future. She was a soldier. She was strong, and she had earned her place, not because anyone had given her permission, but because when the moment came, she'd refused to be anything less than what she was capable of being. And that, Sarah knew, was the strongest thing anyone could do.